J'invite Arlete Cavaliere qui va présider cette séance.
Oui, bonjour. Bonjour. On va commencer cette séance d'après-midi de notre colloque Regards croisés sur la mémoire de la Révolution russe en exil. Cette séance s'intitule Mémoire et idéologie. Bonjour. Et on va commencer avec Nina Segal de l'Université de Jérusalem et qui va nous parler sur Repairing Memory in the Case of Viktor Shklovsky. Merci.
The entire life of Viktor Shklovsky was in fact a consequence of his acute desire to remember and to preserve memory, sometimes in perfect isolation. He decided to approach the problem of repairing memory in 1919 and brought it to fruition in his book A Sentimental Journey, Memoirs from 1917 to 1922, which was published in Berlin in 1923. As we know, in September of the same year, Shklovsky got permission from the Soviet government to come back to Soviet Russia. Thus, the book shows the uneasy relationship between memory in exile and memory in Russia. My lecture deals with one of the strategies of memory presented in Viktor Shklovsky's autobiographical prose. This strategy is based first and foremost on the figure of the author as a memory agent who creates a vast picture of the Russian Revolution. Shklovsky couldn't mention in A Sentimental Journey his own role in the events of the February Revolution. He deliberately didn't write a word about Viktor Chernov or other active members of the Social Revolutionary Party, because the persecution of his friends and the trial of the Central Committee took place during the time he had been writing A Sentimental Journey. He always refused even to talk about it because of Soviet censorship. However, Shklovsky's role might have been more significant since Alexander Galushkin, his literary secretary, wrote that in accordance with still undocumented information, Shklovsky, as the instructor of the Reserve Armed Division, on February the 27th, gave an order to encircle the Admiralty building where the chief of the Petrograd military district, the Lieutenant General Sergei Khabalov, was with his troops. As a result, most of his troops refused to obey him, and Khabalov lost control on the army units. Next day, he was arrested and imprisoned in the Peter and Paul fortress. In such a context, one can suppose that Shklovsky's self-identification in A Sentimental Journey should be supported by Kant's categories of the beautiful and the sublime, to which is also added a method of transforming traumatic experience. Shklovsky, who compared himself as the first-person narrator to Xenophon, Dante, and other great writers and commanders, undoubtedly was in need of such a method to heal his memory of the revolutionary epoch. However, he simultaneously found another way to present his position as a memoirist through references to degradation and ugliness, using a classic parallelism as a hero as an animal. In high literature, especially in poetry, the position of a suffering hero usually expropriates this folklore and literary parallelism, a hero as an animal or a bird, etc., in its positive parallel. A suffering hero as a noble animal or noble bird. For instance, Byron's poem Napoleon's Farewell of 1815 or Pushkin's Uznik, the Prisoner of 1822. In both poems written in the first person, the hero compares himself to the image of an eagle. In Byron's text, One sees the wounded but unconquerable eagle or eagles as the symbol of the captured Napoleon and his veterans. The eagles whose gaze in that moment were blasted had still soared with eyes fixed on victory's sun. Byron's Napoleonic eye could be described through the parallel with the image of the eagle as, I am the eagle, I am the symbol of the Rhine, I am the symbol of might, but now I am defeated and mortally wounded, thus I remain the incarnation of eternal glory and the symbol of future victory. In Pushkin's version, the eagle is the captive bird who calls upon the hero to escape from jail and to unite with the elements and with freedom. The hero's image associates with youth, strength, captivity, and the romantic sadness of the noble bird. I am young, but I am strong, but I am captive and I am melancholy. Thus I must escape to be the embodiment of spiritual freedom. The parallelism, suffering hero as a noble animal, can be based on other images of noble animals like the dolphin in Pushkin's Arion of 1827, or the steed, compare Lermontov's The Prisoner of 1837, or the falcon in Maxim Gorky's The Song of the Falcon, and so on. However, Shklovsky doesn't use the parallelism of a hero as an animal or a bird in this Kantian context of the beauty and the sublime. Rather, he compares himself to the spotted rat and presents the negative concept of this parallelism, a suffering hero as a disgusting animal, rodents, reptiles, etc. In folklore and classic literature, this parallel usually characterizes a false hero or a real hero as opposed to a false hero. The situation is more complicated in modernist literature and culture, especially in Italian and Russian futurism, German expressionism, and the Dada movement, where the comparison with a disgusting creature from the animal world emphasizes the element of challenge. The rat motif was well known in folklore and literature as far back as 13th century with the legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, whose version was first published in Das Knaben Wunderhorn by Arnim and Brentano and appeared thereafter in many literary works, from Goethe, the Brothers Grimm, Robert Browning, to the Russian writers and poets of the 20th century. In Russian culture, the rat motif was strongly associated with the futurist movement from the first futuristic art exhibition Tramvai or Tramvaiv, the Tramway V, Petrograd, March, April 1915, where young Viktor Shklovsky delivered his lecture, The Resurrection of the World. Compare Alexander Averchenko's parody of this exhibition, Krisa na podnosie, The Rat on the Tray. Shklovsky, as a formalist and futurist, knew well the futuristic context of rat images and motifs, from Marinetti's works to the Russian futurist almanacs, manifests, prose, and poetry. The futurist works by Nikolai Burlyuk, for instance, his poem of 1910, «По этой крысе вы ночами ведете брешь к своим хлебам», «The poet and the rat, every night you both dig a hole for your bread», David Burlyuk, Vasilis Gnedov, or Vladimir Mayakovsky, often are based on the contradiction, I'm the futurist and the only authentic poet, you, the society, all the other poets, etc., are the rat or rats. The futurist culture demonstrates the rejection of traditional values in a rather abrupt and unexpected manner. For instance, the title of the almanac cover, «За сахаре кры», published by Ivan Ignatieff in 1913, was usually read by the public as the candid rat or the rat and sugar. The rat motif also demonstrates contradiction and provocation. For instance, the red costume by Mikhail Larionov for the Petersburg Costume Ball of 1913, and many more. The statement, I am a futurist, you are bourgeois and Philistine, is fundamental in all such cases. This statement was very important for Viktor Shklovsky as a memoirist. The first person in a sentimental journey expresses a challenge vis-à-vis the political party that has come to power, the Bolsheviks. In fact, Shklovsky calls the Bolsheviks self-seekers, careerists, and the followers of Max Stirner, the anarchist, but not rats. He writes that Bolshevism is a kind of national psychosis. Now Russia itself is sick. Shklovsky, whom Boris Eichenbaum calls a master of ideas and a master of the phrase, used the red motif to symbolize and plot the direction of Russian historical development which led to Bolshevism. Here, the works of Velimir Khlebnikov are of special importance to Shklovsky, who uses Khlebnikov's approach to the red motif. The image of a rat or mouse in Khlebnikov's poems, such as the super poem Война в мышеловке, War in a Mousetrap, and the Almanac Krisa, the rat, relates to the poet's quest for discovering the mathematical laws of time and destiny. Shklovsky uses Khlebnikov's version of the red motif to demonstrate the national and historical choice of Russia and his own approach to it as a writer. Let me trace the leitmotif of the spotted rat in Shklovsky's book in order to understand his position as a writer in the first person. It begins in the third sentence of the text with the image of a streetcar as a mousetrap for soldiers and Shklovsky himself, and the military police hunting them down in order to get 2 kopecks for every man they arrested. Brownish-gray greatcoats with colored shoulder straps of the battalions and divisions, straps on the collars and colored buttonholes could be interpreted as spots of color in spotted rats. From the first pages of the book, Shklovsky underlines his self-identification as the first person with the image of this spotted rat. In the description of the February Revolution, the soldiers and the common people are presented as similar to rats. Compare Shklovsky's use of the colloquial хвосты, tails, maybe rats' tails, meaning bread lines to describe the situation of bread shortage in Petrograd. I'm quoting, tails appeared at the bakeries. This similarity between the rat-like army and the common people is important for Shklovsky. In the first part of the book, Revolution and the Front, he pays special attention to the moving crowds who fill up the train carriages all over Russia, especially in the south. He depicts in the same way the retreat from Persia, comparing the Russian army and himself with the running spotted rats. Thus, Shklovsky builds a parallel between the front and the rear to accentuate the rat-likeness as his original image of Russia and himself in that period. It's important for Shklovsky to present the events of 1917 from the diachronic perspective. For that reason, he creates the image of a rat migration as a broad, massive, instinctive, unconscious movement. Shklovsky compares 2 such movements, one after the reforms of Peter the Great and the second after the events of 1917. For the first movement of the 18th century, he paraphrases Alfred Brehm's description of rat migration from Asia to Europe in Brehm's famous Tierleben and writes in A Sentimental Journey. In the year 1700 something or other, probably during the reign of Catherine I, it doesn't matter to them, spotted rats from the steppes of Central Asia gathered into herds, legions, swarms, and migrated to Europe. They moved in an even, broad mass, Birds of prey from all over the world hovered over them. Thousands perished, millions perished, hundreds of millions kept going. The rats reached the Volga, hurled themselves into the water, and swam across. The river swept them downstream. The entire Volga, as far as Astrakhan, was dark with their bodies, but they crossed the river and entered Europe. Then they dispersed and became invisible as they occupied every square foot. I joined a small such herd and got a barge at Gelendzhik. Shklovsky's paraphrase of the corresponding fragment of Tierleben underlines that this red migration took place in the 18th century and has been continuing until that very day. However, there are actually two antithetic descriptions of such broad instinctive unconscious movement of 1917 in his memoirs. First is the February Revolution as the urge to freedom and as the reaction to the regime oppression. And the second is the retreat from Persia as the reaction to the regime collapse. The Reds move according to their own instinct, and so does the Russian army in Shklovsky's detailed comparison. And its previous leaders do not know where they are running to. The comparison shows of two movements shows the lack of a leader in all the events of the 1917. In Shklovsky's book, there is only one image, the image of Lenin as a dictator rolling a huge stone before him, which can crush and sweep away everything and everyone. Shklovsky himself felt unsure as to where he was going. He was appointed at the beginning of the February Revolution as assistant commissar in the Southwestern Front, and later as assistant commissar of the Russian Expeditionary Corps in Persia. He understood well what the situation in Persia was. Shklovsky was personally responsible for organizing this retreat, which started at the end of 1917, even before the conclusion of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. He had been a witness of and the participant in the Russian army excesses in Persia, its nationalism, its imperial xenophobia and cruelty to other nations. Shklovsky, like the British Army commander, Brigadier General Frederick James Moberly, who pointed out the loss of morale in the Russian army as the general reason for the failure of the campaign in Persia, also sees the Russian military actions in Persia as a manifestation of the decay of the Russian Empire and its people. In Shklovsky's book, the same leitmotif of decay which has led to February Revolution corresponds to the red motif and especially to the image of red migration. Revolution as a social event is often compared to mortal epidemics, for instance, medieval plagues. The Russian Revolution and communism are of special significance. Two Russian red migrations described by Shklovsky are associated with the pandemics of cruelty and dangerous ideology. Shklovsky's place as the first person is in a whirlpool of these pandemics, followed by the horrific murders and massacres. Shklovsky's function as a hero of his memoirs is to interact with these legions of Reds and the local nations. Such a development of the red motif in Shklovsky's book reminds one of Friedrich Murnau's film of 1922, Nosferatu, which was also regarded by contemporaries as a warning against the communist invasion of the West. The images and motifs of the movie, for instance, Count Orlik, Dracula, and his image as a rat, his silent journey on the ship, the rats from his own grave who follow the vampire, the rat catcher, to the land where the loving young people live in order to infect them with the plague, all that is parallel to Shklovsky's rat motif. The comparison with the Nosferatu raises a problem of the rat catcher image in the sentimental journey. The image of a rat catcher was traditionally associated with great dictators from Napoleon to Hitler, and with the danger of totalitarianism. It was popular in the Russian literature of the period. For instance, Nikolai Aseyev's short story of 1923, Война с крысами, The War with the Rats, Alexander Green's short story Krysalov, The Rat Catcher, 1924, and Marina Tsvetaeva's poem of the same title of 1925. Shklovsky does not mention this image in his book, but he creates such a possibility in the text. He emphasizes the fact that nobody from the Russian army, neither its commanders nor the Russian government, tried to stop the epidemics of cruelty in Persia. Shklovsky describes the change of his own feelings as a political and military activist, I'm quoting, a rat that has gone all across Asia hasn't much to say. It doesn't even know whether it's the same rat that left home. He who identified himself from the beginning of the book with the spotted rat, I'm a spotted rat, one of this crowd, now is hesitating to make the same statement. And he's asking, am I indeed a rat? He finished his book with the name of an American Presbyterian missionary in Persia, Dr. William Ambrose Shedd, who tried to protect the Assyrian people from genocide and saved the lives of thousands of them, especially the children. From Shklovsky's point of view, one human being, like Dr. Shedd and his civilized behavior, can positively change historical development. That is why, at the end of the book, he appeals to Dr. Shedd. Dr. Shedd, bitter are the stairs of exile. Dr. Shedd, like a spotted rat, I made the journey from Ushnu-e to Petersburg with fleeing soldiers. I made the journey from Zhmerenka to Petersburg in a throng of naked prisoners of war coming from Germany. Our train carried coffins, and on the coffins was scrawled in tar, return coffins. Now I live among emigrants, and I'm myself becoming a shadow among shadows. The train carrying coffins with the inscription in tar, return coffins, reminds once again of Murnau's Nosferatu and Hell. Compare Shklovsky's quotation from Dante, the self-image and the images of people as shadows, and the image of exile as the other world. In this context, the last name, Shedd, which Shklovsky writes with one D, creates a possibility to compare it with the English word shed, which can mean, among others, to get rid of something that you don't want to need. For instance, to shed the mask. One could imagine that Shklovsky, as the author of the article The Mystery Story, where he wrote about the function of homonyms in Sherlock Holmes stories, might have used this meaning in order to demonstrate the actual image of the rat catcher in his book. Shklovsky also could know the Hebrew word shed, meaning demon or devil. The devil with coffins in Shklovsky's text also occurs in one of Velimir Khlebnikov's rat motifs, a devil as a rat catcher with the mouse traps hanging from his belt, the poem The War in a Mousetrap. Thus, the book ends not only with a call to mercy, compare also Shklovsky's words about his sympathy for Russia, but it includes his warning about the danger of the East. The Savior would come from the East, as well as the devil, with its spotted or not spotted rats. The progressive function of Shklovsky memory leads the reader to peer into a vast picture of Russian Revolution in order to discern in it more and more details of the world stricken with a terrible disease, the world mired in evil as depicted in the works of Peter Bruegel or Hieronymus Bosch. The choice of Viktor Shklovsky himself is well known. It is so, or Letters Not About Love. Thank you.
On va laisser les questions pour la fin ou on fait, si vous avez des questions, pour la fin, oui. Merci Nina.